Honorable members of the tribunal, dear colleagues, good evening everyone. I'm Abdullah Munjid and I am here on behalf of my client, the Drone IPLC. I will present the claimant from the substance side. Alongside with my co-counsel Zainab Amr will present the claimant from the procedural side. Members of tribunal, before I discuss my submission, I would like to paint a big picture about the case at hand. At first, the parties concluded a contract for the sale of 6 drones from the claimant's top model, which was Kestrel I 2010 at the time of concluded of the contracts. When the dispute arises and the respondents are intended to avoid the parties' contract, the respondent relying on its domestic law to avoid the parties' contract. And the reason of that, members of tribunal, is the respondent's allegation that the CISG could not apply, since we have, from the respondent's view, a sale of aircraft, which the CISG excluded it. In contrary, members of tribunal, and in order to answer your questions regarding this pleading, I would like to discuss two submissions. The first one, that the CISG could apply on the case at hand, and the second one, that in case that the CISG apply, the respondent could not rely on its domestic law to avoid the parties' contract. Members of tribunal, I will start with my first submission, that the CISG could apply on the case at hand. Like what I state, the reason of this question is the respondent's perspective that the drones are type from aircraft and thus the CISG could apply. In contrary to these allegations, members of tribunal, the CISG could apply for the reasons, and I would like to discuss two main points here. The first one, that the drones, and specifically the drones in our case, does not meet the reasons why the CISG excluded aircraft from its scope of application. And the second point, that the elements to apply the CISG were existed in the case at hand. Members of tribunal, I will start with my first point, that the drones, and specifically the drones in our case, does not meet the reasons why the CISG excluded aircraft from its scope of application. Members of tribunal, relying on Article 7.2 and relying 7.1, and relying to the general principles of the CISG to interpret the aircraft's words, which exist in Article 2, Paragraph E from the Convention. When we go back to the history of the CISG, there is two reasons why the CISG excluded aircraft from its scope of application. The second reason is the registration issue, and the second one, that's the nature of the aircraft. Members of tribunal, regarding the first reason, that the registration issue, the reason why the CISG excluded aircraft from its scope of application is the different registration requirements in the legal country in the world. Members of tribunal, thus the CISG could not deal with all these different requirements, and thus the CISG excluded aircraft from its scope of application. But contrary to that, members of tribunal, in our case, the drones in our case were not registered, and there was no any requirements to register it. If I could take the intention from the tribunal to record 36 from the case, members of tribunal, respondent exhibit 5, which is the Aviation Safety Act of the respondent's country, and at the end, Article 10, the registration, and I will read to the tribunal: any aircraft owned or operated by a private entity in the territory of Equatoriana shall be registered at the aircraft registry. Here, members of tribunal, according to the Aviation Safety Act of the respondent's country, only the drones or aircraft or whatever the respondents consider which owned by a private company should be registered. But in our case, members of tribunal, we have a company owned by a state, and those the drones which the respondents spout should not be registered. And then the first requirements, the first reason to exclude aircraft were not met in our case. Moving to the second reason, that the nature of the drones, members of tribunal. The second reason is regarded that in some country they consider the aircraft as immovable goods, and like we know that the CISG only deal with movable goods, then those the CISG excluded aircraft, members of tribunal. But in contrary, members of tribunal, in our case, the drones should be considered as a movable goods from the purpose of it and from the qualifications and the elements of it. Members of tribunal, if I could take the intention from the tribunal to record 10 from the case, claimant exhibit 2, this is the purchase and supply agreement of the parties which signed by the parties, and if the tribunal see paragraph 2, the second line, the last three words stated that to explore the nature resources located in the northern province. Here, members of the tribunal, the purpose of the respondents from buying the drones is only for the surveillance of the earth on the exploration of the north part, so it's only for local purpose and local use, and then should not be considered as territory. And after that, the drones and in our case should be considered as movable goods, and the CISG could deal with it. If the tribunal don't have any further question, I would like to move to my second point, members of the tribunal. Okay, moving to my second point, members of tribunal, which is the elements to apply the CISG were existed in our case. At first, members of the tribunal, since the parties in our case are from different contracting state to the CISG, and I would like from the tribunal to move with me to record 43 from the case, which is the procedural order number 2, and see the first point stated that Equatoriana, Mediterranean, and Danube are contracting state to the of the CISG. Here the parties country are contracting state to the CISG, and relying on the provision of Article 1 from the CISG, members of the tribunal, the CISG could directly apply when the parties are from different contracting state, members of tribunal, and then the CISG could apply. If the tribunal does not have any further question, I would like to conclude my submission, please. Okay, members of tribunal, in conclusion, and from all the reasons that I stated above, we could reach a result, and we respectively ask the tribunal to find that the CISG could apply on the case at hand. Thank you very much.